We continue our study of the Gospel of Matthew in Matthew chapter 26, and you'll see that we have put a lot of time into this one portion of Scripture. This is one of these portions of Scripture that are very deep, and a lot of truths and a lot of understanding can be gained from it. And it's not, as we've tried to show through this, that it's so much what is said as what we see happening to people, that we come to understandings of what the faith is and what the faith entails. Matthew chapter 26, verses 69 and 70. I will be reading from the Good News Bible, which is today's English version. Matthew chapter 26 and verse 69. Peter was sitting outside in the courtyard when one of the high priest's servant girls came to him and said, "You too were with Jesus of Galilee." But he denied it in front of them and said, "I don't know what you are talking about," he answered. I feel for Peter because at this point I see myself in him. Here is my spin on what is happening here. I think Peter was in a way caught off guard with this question. I think Peter was processing things. I think Peter was trying to make sense of a chaotic situation. I think initially he was just saying, "Buzz off, leave me alone, give me space." He was not so much in denial of faith as uncertain of what he believed. Now I'm nuancing things here, and I know I may be wrong. The woman forced Peter to say something in a time when he was not ready to say something. Now, to say this is not to absolve Peter of what he did. Peter should have by this time had a better grasp of who and what Jesus is. It would be great if all of us came to faith just like that. And at that moment, fully grasp what it means to have faith in Jesus Christ. It is the idea that a person in a moment of time at the end of a church service makes a decision for Christ and it's settled and it's done, and that's it forevermore. They've gone from here to there, boom, done. Read the stories of people like Ambrose, Augustine, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, or C.S. Lewis, and you realize that the coming to faith is often a process. We could use the word journey. It takes time. There's a number of steps involved for some people to come to faith, a number of questions, a number of doubts, a number of uncertainties, understandings, and so on and so forth. It's not always just like that. A process that does not end when one becomes a person of faith. And that's also important. The faith journey is only just beginning when you come to faith. The journey of faith is difficult, for it involves not only understanding who Jesus is, but I would say at a certain level and at a certain point, we cannot understand who Jesus is without seeing who we are in light of who Jesus is. In that sense, no one really understands who they are or humanity is in general unless they first understand who Jesus is. Peter was not just dealing with who Jesus was when he was denying him. Key point. Peter was also in a state of denial of who he was. You see, as Jesus was a mystery to him, so Peter was a mystery to himself. We rightly tell the story that night as a story of Peter's denial of Jesus 3 times. Peter would not really understand who Jesus was until Peter saw who he was. This is true of all of us. We can never really understand who Jesus is until we come face to face with who and what we are. We talked about in an earlier reading just recently about the barriers to faith, and here's the great barrier of faith that is common to all of us, that if we are to understand who Jesus is and what Jesus can bring to our life and why we need Jesus, well, the great barrier is to see ourselves as we truly are. And that's not a pretty thing, and that's not for the faint of heart. We will never understand who Jesus is until we come face to face with who and what we are. If we cannot see how deep and pervasive our fallenness and brokenness is, then we cannot begin to fathom how great the work of salvation that Jesus provides. You see, unless you understand the depth of depravity within you, you are not going to see the greatness of the solution that Jesus provides. The story is almost comical. Peter was challenged by someone who was weak and powerless. This lady had no status and no power in the world, you know, and he falls over with a puff of wind, so to speak. There is a tale of caution for all of us here. Mentally, we can prepare ourselves for the great challenges to our faith and yet remain vulnerable and weak to those spur of the moment moments. Peter had resolved to never fall away. Matthew chapter 26:33. And in a sense was true to that. He was still with Jesus, albeit from a distance. In that moment, Peter failed Jesus. In that moment, Peter was beginning to see who he was and who he was not. It would be the latter that would enable him to see who Jesus was.